Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us at the Ideas Panel Series. I'm Evelyn Espinal, co-founder and CEO of Ideas Global, and I will be moderating today's conversation. Natasha Rainey and I are so excited to be able to launch this premier network where the world's top DEI executives and practitioners are going to be able to come together, share insights, and co-create solutions that are going to be able to accelerate our ambition for inclusion, diversity, equity, activism, and social impact. That's what IDEA stands for. And this is the first of our monthly panel discussions. It's featuring an illustrious group of ED&I executives who are really coming together to confront some of the unspoken and most challenging issues that are facing our community. Today, we're going to delve into the issue of pushback to D&I. We've been seeing pushback in communities, in organizations, in government systems, and even in some of our social mindsets. I'm joined by Christina, Asad, and Kathrine. They're going to be sharing their views on the pushback to the D&I work. What are they experiencing? What does it look like? What's driving it? And what can we learn from each other's approach so that we can confront it? I want to give you a slight taste of who the panelists are, but more importantly, I want you to have an opportunity to hear directly from them. So our distinguished panels include Christine Gerkett. She is the head of diversity, inclusion, belonging, and emerging talent at Reddit. She brings more than 15 years of experience helping companies reach their potential. She specializes in building corporate value through market advantage, leveraging employees' unique skills and perspectives, and also working on workplace culture. Asad Dhunna. Asad is the founder and CEO of the Unmistakables. It's an award-winning consultancy that builds client confidence to make sure that they have unmistakable impact on culture and creativity. They work with some of the world's largest organizations, and they're trying to accelerate inclusion. They're using a lot of skills like senior leadership development, advising on strategy, skills building, and systems rewiring. But I think most importantly, the work that they do is underpinned by an industry leading model called Inside Out Inclusion. And Kathrine Glahn, head of DEI at Pandora, the world's largest jewelry store. Kathrine brings 23 years of financial industry experience, primarily in capital markets and investment banking. She brings this to her role in HR. She is an experienced facilitator of cultural transformation, leadership development, and crisis management. For the past 4 years, she's been honing her skills as a DEI practitioner, leading the strategic initiatives at Pandora that foster an inclusive culture and ensure equitable practices across the entire global organization. Thank you all for joining us today. I couldn't imagine a better team of people to help us kick off this panel series. So to help the audience get to know you each a little bit better, I'd like to ask you if you can share the why for you about being in the ED&I field. Kathrine, I'd love to start with you and then hear from Christine and Asad.
Of course. And thank you, Evelyn, for that very fine introduction. So as you heard, I'm responsible for D&I in Pandora. And before that, I have a past in the financial industry. And the reason why I have chosen to work with D&I is because it's so meaningful to me. I've spent 20 years in business trying to raise, the stock prices for my shareholders. But I would rather work with improving the quality of the work life for the many than profit for the few stakeholders. So that's why I'm working with DE&I, meaningfulness and wanting to make an impact on where I am.
Thank you.
I got to tell you, for me, I think that even if I ended up being a high school janitor, I would still be in diversity and inclusion work, meaning that it's always just been a part of who I am, how I think, how I lead, the perspective that I look at the world. The reason why I'm specifically in diversity inclusion and belonging these days is because I really feel like in the past several years, even before 2020, because we had the Me Too movement happening before then, the world was in a specific place where I felt like I had a very poignant skill set that could be utilized to help in this area. And so I'm specializing in this right now. But I can remember being 8 years old, 10 years old in the McDonald's drive-through with my parents and hearing comments from adults talking about the people that work at the facility and me trying to give them perspective, like, well, how do you know these people have not had, a difficult life so far, and these are the things that they need in order to survive, that whole thing. And so it's just always been part of who I am, to be able to think about the human experience from a perspective that feels inclusive. And so I'm here doing this work now, and no matter what my future brings in terms of actual career opportunities, I'll always be in this work.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
So it's an interesting question, Evelyn, thinking about why I'm working in DEI, because I interpreted the question as, well, how did you get into this field and how did this happen? And I think a lot of people who work in DEI ask themselves that question every now and then. At the Unmistakables, we talk about lived expertise. So how do you put together the lived experiences that you have with the professional expertise that you're developing and building? And I think for underrepresented or historically marginalized people who are going through their careers, there is always that element of those two things working together. My professional expertise came through marketing and communications, where I was running campaigns in the marketing for some of the world's biggest brands in agencies. And I started to get questions from clients about, how do we reach X community? How do we reach X audience? How do we do that in a way that's going to work? And I found that actually the system of marketing couldn't necessarily answer that question. And when I dug a bit deeper, I started to learn why. And so I built this consultancy that transforms organizations from the inside out, and doing that in a way that brings in behavioral science, insight, advisory. And I think the lived experience part of me, maybe like Christina, I guess I kind of had no choice after a while. I think as a British Asian man, Indian parents, gay, Muslim, and then I recently got an ADHD diagnosis. I was like, okay, I think there's just something here telling me that I need to put this to a bit of use to help understand the world. So I think maybe my perspective and my expertise is why I'm working in this field. But I do ask myself, why am I working in this field quite a few times?
I think that's fantastic, and it resonates so well for me. I actually have parents who were immigrants who left their home country, came to a new world where they didn't even speak the language, and they struggled. And as a very young child, I was the home interpreter. So I would be going to these bigger adult meetings with them to help them get unemployment insurance or fill out a job application. And from that moment, I knew that there was something that I needed to do to help people talk to each other, connect with each other, learn from each other. And so it all comes full circle for me to be able to have this kind of session and bring incredible people like yourselves together to have this conversation. I wanted to start by asking each of you to help us define what the pushback is that you're seeing. So can you describe the pushback that you're experiencing in society, in organizations, in government systems? It would be really great if you can also share the challenges that you are personally seeing. And I'd love to start with Christina.
Yeah, for sure. This feels maybe like a little bit broad of an answer, but I feel like the pushback that we're seeing right now is a result of the unfortunate nature of the cyclical nature of history, meaning that I feel like there was a huge focus and push on equality and inclusion for a while. And then there was a pullback, which we've seen happen several times throughout history. In addition to that, I feel like people are a little bit fatigued by the conversation. And then people ended up on different sides of the conversation, if there could be a different side of inclusion, which politicized it. And so now which really is at its core a human issue has become political issue, and so people feel like they need to automatically feel one way or another. And in my mind, it's made the work quite difficult to deliver on in certain audiences because you have to find a different way to make impact in a way that doesn't feel somehow as triggering as it does right now for some folks.
I think it's really interesting hearing you say that, Christina, because when I think about the pushback and what kind of sides that we're seeing forming, sometimes they feel like they're in a bit of echo chambers, and that's being influenced by technology. So the fact that we're communicating in different ways, we don't necessarily have the same level of interaction. But I also think part of the pushback that I've been seeing is around wealth inequality and actually how distributed wealth is at the moment, and the competing forces that there are in wealth distribution. And you're seeing that a lot through politics. You're seeing that a lot with the UK elections and what's happening around the world. But I think part of the pushback is actually linked to what's happening in the economy and in politics, which sometimes gets detached from talking about talent pathways or employee resource groups. But I think is inherently linked. But I guess I'd love to hear what you think, Kathrine.
Yeah, well, speaking of wealth, I think that's a good point, Asad. I mean, I've been working in the financial industry, and the pushback that I've been faced there has predominantly been from white privileged men of a certain age. And I do understand and I do sympathize with them, as they've been doing their thing in a certain way for years and been praised for reaching great results. And perhaps no one has really bothered or cared about how those results has been obtained. So I understand the fear that is driving that pushback when it comes to wealth for the few. And I do think that we need to be super careful about the narrative around DEI and how we position what we want to accomplish with the DEI work.
Kathrine, I love that point, and it just brings up for me a persistent question that has been in my mind. And I think about any organization that I've been a part of, when we're trying to work on solving a problem, we usually name the issue, right? So we say, this is the thing that we want to change. But DEI doesn't do that, right? DEI is framing things in this positive way. It sort of references the outcomes that we want to achieve. And I find that sometimes we're not readily willing to have the conversation about the things that get in the way, like bias in selection or discrimination in promotion. In fact, a member of our community today emailed me yesterday and asked if we could talk about an issue that they're confronting in his organization, and that was around retention of diverse hires. So in his organization over the past 4 years, they've averaged only a 21% retention rate, but the compensation that they've been doling out has been 23% higher than what was budgeted for. So it makes you wonder, are we having the right conversation? Why don't we have real-time examples of the case for DEI actually working? So I'd love to know from your vantage points, what is not being said about this work that we should explore, right? Where is the real resistance?
So I could come in on that one, Christina and Kathrine. So where is the resistance? I think some of that speaks to what Kathrine was saying of who feels like it's an opportunity, who feels like it's a threat. About 5 years ago, I wrote a piece in the Harvard Business Review that was called Stop Saying the Word Diversity and Just Say What You Think. Because I think the word diverse or diversity gets coded in our minds. So it often means race. That people go, it's all, I need a diverse hire, I need more diversity. What they're really trying to say is we need more black and brown people. So then you go, well, why do you need that? Where is that coming from? Oh, we're in a city within which that is the higher. Okay, well, why aren't you reaching them today? Oh, because we're not looking in the, okay, why aren't you? And you have to keep going on the why. But if you just start with the, we want to be more diverse, a business can just go, yeah, we all want more diversity. Well, yeah, great. And then no one walks out with them what that is. There are two other concepts that I'm seeing that are playing out, and I think are the real conversations. So if anyone knows the Gartner hype cycle, which is a model that shows how technology is adopted, and I'll explain it through the iPhone. So we started with this phone that came along and it had no buttons on it. And we thought, well, that's interesting. What could that be? And then all of a sudden 3G came along and we thought this could be the solve of everything. And I could do everything on my phone, from my pictures, from my music, everything. And then we enter this trough of disillusionment where we say, okay, we're spending too much time on our phones. And what about our kids? And what are we losing? And what's this going to mean? And then we need to get to a place where we go, actually, we can integrate this into our lives. And diversity is following the same kind of curve where we went, okay, it's rumbling along, 2020, massive accelerant. And then we're in this disillusionment now where we're saying, well, how do you integrate this into the everyday? And what does this mean? And I think when it comes to senior executives in business, there's a lot of, well, we've been successful for 20 to 30 years. We've been doing something really well. Oh, and by the way, that served me really well. But also, how do we code this for the future and what does that look like? And that then comes down to economic principles and whether you believe in The Invisible Hand by Adam Smith. So I would just say, like, name it. If it's diversity, what do you really mean? And then actually, why are we feeling disillusioned about it? And I think part of that, to be really honest, and I'd like to talk to this group about it, is DEI professionals aren't the best at integrating into the mainstream narrative, which is around wokeism and what's happening in the wider world. So the question is, how do you interface into that? And how do you make sure you're being relevant to what other people are feeling about DEI outside of the industry of DEI?
That was amazing. I just could visualize the entire scope of what you were describing. And I'd really love to understand a bit about how this shows up in companies. So Kathrine and Christina, as senior executives in very relevant corporations, what do you see as the real resistance?
I'm going to riff off of what you just said, Asad, around like saying what you mean. Because at the very least, I think that's what's also happening right now. People are categorizing certain words. They maybe learned the impact of these words previously, maybe even felt motivated to delve into the impact of these words in 2020. Words like bias, words like privilege, words like, all these words. Now people are, from what I've seen, having a difficult time internalizing how this might show up in their real life, in their real work, et cetera, versus only thinking about the definition and how they've been taught to think about it. I also think, this goes back to like leadership 101. And I don't know if in the room here are people leaders. I've been a people leader for a long time. I know the folks on this panel are people leaders, but if you're in the audience and you're also a people leader, maybe you can relate to this. When you became a manager and maybe you went to like a management essentials class or something that your company offered, there's two things. The first thing is most people don't get promoted to being a manager because they're excellent with people. They get promoted to being a manager because they're excellent at what they do and they have to learn the people leadership part, which is why we do like management essentials. But the second thing is how to be an inclusive leader is not always written into the bedrock of leadership essentials. So now it feels like an aside. People have learned how to be great in their mind leaders. They learned what it takes to be a manager. Oh, by the way, this stuff that we're teaching over here was never part of the original script. So it wasn't important. And now it's a competing priority. And Todd, what you mentioned around like DEI professionals are not great at becoming part of the main narrative. I think that is what we need to become great at in order for it to be one voice, one leadership concept, right? That includes inclusivity, that includes being self-reflective about what our automatic assumptions are, what the common pitfalls are, and who we choose to hire, who we choose to promote, who we choose to spend the most time with, who's getting the most pay, who's getting through, who's applying and who's getting through the hiring process, right? All of those things are just basic, really good leadership that many people just weren't taught at the beginning and now feel like they're competing priorities.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that because one of the companies that I worked with, we had this aha moment that by the time you go into that executive leadership program, what you're really doing is unlearning the things that you've been doing up until that point. Because to Kathrine's point earlier, people weren't necessarily putting an equal amount of attention to what you were doing and how you were doing it. Kathrine, what's your view?
Yeah, well, you asked Evelyn around the real resistance, and I don't think we can answer that before we have an answer to what are we trying to solve. So I very much agree. In there's a comment in the comment section by Leana. I hope I'm pronouncing that correct. It's different from company to company, but definitely also from country to country. What needs to be solved? I mean, in Pandora, we operate in 100 different countries, and what potentially is getting in the way of me succeeding with the DEI work is if you don't understand the starting point, coming back to what are we trying to solve, doing the diagnostics of the patient before you administer the medicine is crucial if you want to be successful with DEI. So the real resistance, my answer to that would be, it depends.
And that's a comprehensive answer, because I do think your point about diagnosing and really getting to some of the root of the issues is a blank space for us. In many organizations, what I find is that people go forward without having a clear vision of what is the outcome that they want, and without doing that diagnosis that tells them what are the issues that they have to change. Because even though most organizations are set up in similar ways, they're incredibly different animals, right? And it's not one size fits all. So it would be really helpful for our audience if each of you could share some of the specific approaches that you're putting in place to address resistance, right? What we're confronting that gets in the way. So how are you adapting this work so that you're able to have the impact that you want on employees, on your brand, and on your customers and consumers as well? Christina, how is Reddit responding?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll talk a little bit about how Reddit is responding, but also just what I think is good practice, right? And how we're responding as a team that I think can be applicable anywhere. I want to talk for 1 second though about the medicine to be administered. So completely agree with the diagnostic work. You can have the data, you can have all of the conversations, you can know the specific areas where the company needs to improve, and then have a prescription for the medicine, right? That's your roadmap. That's like your strategic plan that you're going to deliver on. But the areas that need to be improved are areas of improvement for a reason, because the mentality has to change. Lots of the thinking around the processes, lots of things. Sometimes the policies have to change in order to make improvements in these areas. That's part of the medicine. And what I've seen is that, especially if you've started this work at a time where there was a lot of attention on it, or you were doing it, people were super open to the idea of what needs to be fixed and let's do this. And then, when it comes down to taking the medicine, it becomes, all right, now how do the first couple of bites, they were okay. With the Vegemite. I don't know if you've ever seen I Love Lucy, but like the Vegemite was a really disgusting medicine that it required a lot to put down the hatch. They were okay with the first couple of bites, but then it becomes, how do we make the medicine sweeter? How do we hide the peas and the brownies, if you will, so that people can continue to take the medicine once we've diagnosed, once we know, right? How do people continue? How do we keep the conversation moving forward? Because I feel like right now is a time where lots of people are feeling shut down from even moving the conversation forward. And that is what I'm focusing on. We have the roadmap. Look, at Reddit, we have 11 ERGs for community. They've been an excellent source of folks feeling a place of, shared space with people that have pretty consistent values and interests. We already do the pay parity audits. We have extensive procedures around our hiring. We do inclusive interview training for our leaders. We have inclusive leadership workshops, several of them for our, we're one-on-one coaching with our leaders. All of those basic things that come from the diagnoses. And then it becomes, well, if there's fatigue around this, and if I say the word bias and people don't know what that means, like they know by definition, but they are shut down in sort of understanding how it affects them and how it shows up in their everyday life, not only when they're in a workshop. Or if I say privilege and they're like, no, I don't really know, then I need to change how I'm administering the medicine. The medicine can stay the same, but
Yeah.
I then need to also pivot on my approach. So that is what I'm really focusing on and what I'm really having my team focus on. Like, look, if we can't ungray this, if we can't use other words to actually say what we're trying to say, to Asad's point, right? Like, instead of saying this diversity, what does that mean? What are we trying? Instead of saying bias, say like, what are some of the common pitfalls that people run into? Now we're open again because bias now has become politicized, right? So,
but don't you think, Christina, like it's like, stop saying bias and say what you really mean. Stop saying privilege and say what you really mean. Like these words in the DEI industry have just been like, allyship is a that they get rolled around. Everyone's like, yeah, okay, I've got to do something. Okay, no, too much. That it's the same kind of.
Yeah, because now people are committed to memorizing a definition instead of internalizing like how their experience actually matches up with what we're trying to say because they can relate to it. And so I'm trying to go back to creating an emotional response by actually talking about the thing, the experience, what it actually means. I find it opens up the mind again.
One of the things I find in trying to work with employees or brands or customers is actually most people, on the whole, in 6 years of running a business in this, they have a way into DE&I. There is like maybe 1 or 2 degrees separation. So it's either themselves going, I've experienced it, or going, my kid, my parent, my ex, my Y, my Z, because we all operate in the world and we all see what happens in the world. And it used to be that we would leave the world, go into our offices, do our work, and go back into the world. That's blown up. We know that's blown up. So now it's saying, how do I integrate all of this? And I think quite unpopularly, I often say, and with the company we say, you've got to meet people where they are. The challenge with that is some activism lenses are, well, no, you just have to say like it's this way and not that way. But I think in corporate machines, it's so hard to do that because then it can feel like you're being hit with a big slap in the face or a big wet fish that goes, just be over here. And I was going, I don't know how to get there. The other thing I think that I've seen work really well is articulating the opportunity really clearly. And that is quite easy to do. It sounds easy, but if you just use a risk and reward framework that goes, what are the risks if we don't do this? What are the rewards if we do? And actually, when you start to talk about risks, as particularly in things like the third sector and the charity space, you get integrated into the governance mechanism of the risks that we're looking at all the time. So when I've sat on the board of charities, DEI has continually been a risk because it's something we need to be looking at reputationally, but also through the talent lens. And then I think the other thing that is a bit unpopular is around this whole moral business case. We keep doing the swing and the dance. Like, is it the moral case? Is it the business case? Which case is it? What case, like what day of the week it is? And what case? I think actually it's just going, well, it's the human case, right? Most people I speak to go, do you know what? My 11-year-old kid, I think they might be neurodiverse. Do you know what? My cousin, they don't identify as straight. Do you know what? I know a man who doesn't really know his role in the workplace anymore because he's scared of gender equality. Most people know that. So you know the human element. It's then the translation of, well, what does this mean for my business? And I think that's the bit I'm quite interested in of, well, where do we go with the conversation? What does it then mean? Because you're right, all the push around gender equality is going to have and is having a backlash. We're seeing it in the data. So to confront and adapt to that backlash, you have to understand, well, why do people feel like that? Where is that coming from? And then at its bedrock, it often comes from just opportunities in life.
Kathrine, anything that you want to share with us about how you're approaching the DEI work in your organization?
Yeah, well, I'm very much still, because I've actually only been the head of DE&I in Pandora for 3 months. So I'm still very much in, so what medicine do I need to give this patient and what's wrong with it, right? And it was the same in my old company where I usually sat with the executive team saying, yeah, but guys, and they were guys, guys, I really sense that the company needs something different, and, and they couldn't care about, my sensing or my feeling or gut feeling. So there, I really needed to come with data. So I did surveys, I did one-on-ones, I did focus groups, and then at some point, my CEO looked at me and said, "Okay, Kathrine, I get it. Can you do something about it?" So I still think that data is very much the entry ticket to getting to work with this and create the business case. And then I'm very much agreeing with Asad's point that yes, and then it becomes a humanizing of that business case. And there I really, really think that we need to be patient as a DEI practitioners, because we are so much ahead of the curve and so much more mature perhaps than the people that we meet and the company that we're working in, and really having the empathy and sympathy and the patience to get them to where we are in that journey, I think is crucial, that we don't move too fast, too fast.
Makes a lot of sense to me. I think I'm still filled with a lot of unanswered questions personally. You know, I was part of my role as executive coaching, and I was onboarding a CEO, and their question to me was, you know, what is the value of ED&I? And I wondered if this is a pillar in the organization, if it's coming up in diagnosis, right, for charities, for corporations, that's something that is a risk. Why would a CEO not already know what that is? Is that CEO onboarding and asking sales? I'm not sure I understand how sales work. Is that CEO onboarding and asking finance? I'm not sure that I understand what your role is, or marketing. So there's something there for me still on, there's realities about this work that people are choosing not to look at, right? Because at the end of the day, we can get into analysis paralysis with data, and the data will show things like you don't have any people of color in your leadership ranks, or you don't have the ability to retain, you know, talent that has the right capabilities, can't find a way to fit into your culture. So there is something for me that's still an unresolved issue around the real nugget that people need to take, that to Christina's earlier point, take that medicine, take that pill. And the pill feels like that wake-up call that says there's injustice, there are inequities, and it isn't a fair assessment to say meritocracy, when in reality, how people are being judged in terms of their contribution to the business isn't inherently just or equal or fair.
The word that comes up for me, Evelyn, as you're speaking, is value and values. Because for me, something around the values of an organization, which is often where that invisible hand plays a role that says we're going to do some social good. But there's something about the value of DEI that does, when the record plays, skips a beat and someone goes, what is the value? And in every client we've worked with, it's been different to what is the value. So when we use our inside out methodology, we're able to get some consistency about what's happening. But when you find the value of it, then the CEO goes, aha, I get it. That's when the record hits the right note. So I guess Christina and Kathrine, like in your organizations, have you got to that, like, this is the value that it means for Reddit, this is the value that it means for Pandora?
Yeah, I think that the overarching, even from the CEO sentiment, is balanced teams are better. Isn't that the thing that we've been trying to say? Like, and I find that our execs, our managers can digest that better. Instead of talking about all the statistics that we know around how diversity improves outcomes, creativity, revenue, all of those things, people get balanced teams are better. And it doesn't only feel like we're talking about Black and brown people. It feels like we're talking about what perspectives are missing and what perspectives do you still need to get in order to make your team more successful, more creative, reach more people, etc. So I think that's so important. But one thing, Asad, that I wanted to touch on that both you and Evelyn touched on is the value piece. And the reason why I'm still really encouraged is because not only are we having this conversation, but the business is still having the conversation. Shoot, they might be trying to fit us in somewhere, right? Like where do y'all, I mean, what's happening here? But they're still talking to us. And I remember back in the day, the same conversation existed for most HR functions. And when I was doing HR for HR, the biggest conversation that I would have with other HR generalists and managers is, how do I get a seat at the table? Essentially is, how do I make the business see our value? We're trying to create policies and procedures. The business is trying to create operationally sound processes. And my answer to them was always, stop worrying about a seat at the table and bring the turkey. You bring the meat, they'll bring the seat, right? Like they'll bring something for you if you're bringing something to the table. And
Christina, it's that's the case in any non-revenue generating seat around the board. Comms marketing is exactly the same conversation.
100%. And so, but it's cyclical, right? Because now I feel like people are asking less, what's the value of HR versus, 15 years ago. HR has very largely in many organizations made themselves a business imperative. And we're just sort of at the beginning of that journey in D&I where people still don't fully understand. It's our responsibility to bring the meat. I would damn near say that we're closer to revenue generating because of all this data that shows that the more diverse teams are, the more successful they are, right? And there's actual real numbers to back that up that we can translate into human action. But this is the same cycle that all non-revenue generating departments go through. And so I don't think we should be especially discouraged because we're talking about D&I, although there are lots of things happening in the world right now that might tell us otherwise.
No, I think that's an excellent point because there's the S curve for businesses, right? And I think there's the S curve for diversity. There's an expectation that when you get this sort of a spotlight and attention, right? And funds, right? As we did in 2020, for example, into a field. Then there's show me the results, show me the meat, show me the turkey. And then you see a decline when that doesn't surface, right? When you're not able to have balanced teams, when you're not able to demonstrate that the manager, the leader knows how to actually get the value out of the balanced team, right? So we still see that coming back around. An absolutely excellent point. So I don't want this conversation to end. I think it's absolutely extraordinary. I love the depth that we've had and the different areas. The comments on the side from our members has been fantastic. But I do think it'd be important to have each of you share sort of a parting thought, right? What is a message that you want our audience to take away with them about this question of how do we address this pushback, the cyclical pushback to D&I? What's the real resistance and what can they be thinking about as they continue to be practitioners in this work? Kathrine, can we start with you?
Sure. I was just thinking about the mental picture of the meat on the table. And I think one of the things that I'm currently struggling with and is my goal for the next half year is actually just getting everyone at the same table eating the same meat. Because in Pandora, we've launched ERGs a couple of years ago, and I see many of the participants here are my good colleagues from our US area, and they've done exquisite work in the DE&I space. And then in other parts of the world, they can't even spell it, let alone pronounce it. So I think aligning and getting people at this to get at the same table, eat from the same dish or the meat, and then really have compassion and meet your organization and the people in it where they are. Coming back to I am as a DEI practitioner, I'm the tour guide. So guide them. Don't judge, don't blame. My main message is always just be love.
That's a great message. Thank you. Asad, Christina?
For me, it's almost the same and almost opposite of what you just said, Kathrine. I mean, I'm not going to go backwards on what I said about bring the meat, but it's going to sound like it. So just work with me here. Some people are vegans. What do I mean?
That was my point, Christina. Oh.
We're always right here. Some people are vegan. Means that like there's actually not one size that fits all. Right. And that's the biggest lesson that I've had to learn along this journey too. I think it was Asad that mentioned it earlier, and like how oftentimes as practitioners of this work, what does not work in a corporate setting is we say like, you have to see it this way. Like that's wrong. It's this way. isn't that the antithesis of why we do this work anyway? Because we want our whole mission is to get people to see something from a perspective that perhaps they're not seeing it now. And so as practitioners of this work, it is also really important that we stay flexible and that we're able to at least see perspectives that are not our own in order to be able to make an impact. And so for me, it's remembering that there's not one size that fits all, that there's not only one medication that's going to work. And the most effective tool is to get people to humanize the experience. Erica in the chat said that some people are uncomfortable being in a balanced team. So how do we create comfort and shared experiences? That's not a quick fix, Erica. And for everybody else, what I have found that works though is like get people outside of their own feelings. There's a book called The Second Sex. It's a very old book, but it talks about some of the gender norms that were present in the early 1900s. And it's amazing to see how a lot of those gender norms still exist today. But you get people talking about the women that are in their life. Everybody has a mother, a sister, or auntie, a somebody, right, that they know that have been subject to these gender norms. And now they can start talking about what they see out there and how unfair it is for people that they know. And over time, they will begin to humanize those experiences. So in rooms that they're also in, they can be able to see those injustices. It's not overnight, but I found that being flexible in the approach and, not a workshop will not work for everyone. Sometimes it's a conversation. Sometimes it's a book, an article. Sometimes it's a policy. It just depends on what we need at that moment. That's the medicine that's administered.
I was going to make the vegan point, Christina, about not everyone wants meat at the table, but I was like, oh, I'll come up with a new point. But for me, the thing that gives me hope, because I think reading some of the headlines and just going through all the rigmarole and the buy-ins and the sell-ins and all of that kind of thing, the bit that gives me hope is actually when you just look around in society and you think, what does the next generation look like? What is the future of the economy? And how is politics evolving? And when I think about all of those three things, I think, okay, the politics bit is quite scary, but we're seeing some change here in the UK that feels somewhat positive, to the point where a minister this morning said, it's the end of the culture wars. We need to put that behind us. Now, after 2 years of relentlessly seeing culture war articles, there's a bit of relief that says, okay, we can move on. The bit about the economy is actually the economic conversation that I hear amongst young people is, I will never have a home, or it will be really difficult for me to buy a house. So why am I working and what is this for? So if we frame the conversation to go, well, what is work then for? Why do people do it if it's not for some economic reward that's about shelter? Then we can start to open up a conversation that says, well, what are we here for and what are we here to do? And that gives me loads of hope, because I think when you look at the trends, and I really would encourage DEI professionals to be thinking about world trends, because that's what CEOs are thinking about. They're thinking about what is the future of my customer base, my colleague base, the value I'm making for shareholders. That's exciting. And I think with what Kathrine and Christina and Evelyn said about looking into the future, being able to see that horizon because your colleagues are telling you that customer base, that's exciting. But I think DEI needs a bit of a refresh, shake up and rebrand to get there.
Well, I tell you, three of you give me hope. Asad, Kathrine, and Christina, you have been absolutely fantastic. I want to thank you for your authenticity and the candor that you brought to this discussion. I think you really shared some amazing pearls of wisdom. And truly, this was the most amazing inaugural panel for the Ideas Global brand. So thank you so much. And to our audience, I want to thank you again for logging in. We just gave you a taste of the amazing DEI executives and experts that are going to be participating in these live streams panel on a monthly basis. Our ambition is that we're all going to be able to engage in meaningful conversations and explore the deeper forces that are influencing the work that we're trying to do. Ideas Global is a platform that's powered by DEI leaders for DEI leaders. And this is the place where all of us that are responsible for organizational culture, demographics, policies, practices, we can come together and talk about the most critical issues that are facing our teams and our organization. This October, you're going to have an opportunity to be part of an annual summit. We'll have over 30 chief diversity officers from leading global brands. They're going to be sharing how they're reshaping the workplace and the future. And our hope is that together we can all actually have a bigger, broader impact. Hopefully, you'll be interested in becoming members of the network. Looking forward to seeing all of you at our next network meeting next month. And thank you again, everyone, for being a part of this discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.